Hi, I'm Deb. I'm the Traveling Stocking Stitcher, and I'm really glad you could join me here today. This is a Flosstube extra tutorial, and it is going to be all about the subject of beading. So I've called this episode, The Beadings Will Continue Until Morale Improves. Not the beadings of punishment necessarily. I actually enjoy doing it. One, it means you're almost at the end of your project, because typically you're going to do your beads last, and also because every bead you put on just makes it that much more shiny. So I recently just completed a very heavily beaded project, and it is the Beaded Peacock Tile. I am wearing my peacock dress today, and here it is. It is part of the Beaded Tile series that Martina Rosenberg did for Chatelaine Designs, and get in here close where you can take a look at it. And when I started looking at chatelaines, I saw this, and this is the very first one that I wanted to do. And I bought 3 chatelaines first, and I wanted to do this, but I was very, very afraid. I was terrified of doing this one because I hadn't done a ton of beading before. And so this one sat for a while, and I've actually done a number of other chatelaines first, built up my confidence, and even going into this one, I still was a little intimidated. But I've done a little research, I've done some practicing, and I'm really glad I did. I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. I'll be using this today to kind of talk through what I've learned, what I did, some of the techniques, things about the tools that I use in beading, my organization for beads, the orientation of beads, because they don't always give you a whole lot of guidance on that. And, beading applies to all things, not just chatelaine. So if you haven't done chatelaine before, but you're interested in doing maybe a Mirabilia or something that has a lot of beads on it, this will apply as well. I personally think the best time to think about beads is not when you get to the end of your project and you're ready to start beading, because a lot of times people will do them last. I'll talk about the pros and cons of that in a minute. But you really want to start thinking about it before you even picked out your fabric. So before you start a project, I would highly consider looking at your project, thinking about the beads, and making that choice for your fabric with beads in mind. Now generally 28 count is typically a preferred count of fabric if you're doing beading, just because it's going to allow you to fit things on comfortably. One of the things you want to think about is if you're going to use a hand dyed, there's going to be some shrinkage. So in the dyeing process, those holes are going to get closer and closer together, and it won't be as easy to fit as many beads in a row or flat. You may have to leave some beads off if it's very tight. And especially if you're making a specific pattern, it makes it hard to recreate. If I'm just doing a row of beads and I have 20 beads in a row and I have to only put 19 beads in the row, not a big deal. But if I'm doing a design that has maybe a rose, I'll show you one of the centers of one of my projects that I did, another chatelaine at Pompeii Gardens, that has an intricate design in the middle, and leaving any of them out will not work. Even this beaded peacock tile, if I leave out some of the beads in this peacock tail, it's going to look a lot different if I can't fit them. Same thing with the eye, and I'll demonstrate how I've got these to line up when I show you how to do those things. So you really want to think about how your beads are going to flow. So look at the design on the Chatelaine gallery, if there is one out there available for you. If there's not, you might want to look at just the chart itself. On chatelaine.de is where you buy the PDF patterns, or European Cross Stitch Company has mock-ups. They're not the actual stitch designs, but you can take a look and figure out if there's a big pocket of beads. Sometimes you can tell that, not always from the drawing though. So ideally, the Chatelaine gallery that has the stitched items is the best place to look. Now one other thing you can do to figure out what's the best fabric choice for you is go to the chatelaine.de website. One thing you can look at before you even buy a chart is to look at the materials list that they have, and they will recommend a fabric size for you. So they'll tell you whether you should use a 28 count. Sometimes they actually will tell you, be sure you use a 28 count, because there are very dense sections of beadings. Sometimes they'll say you can use a 16/32, which means you could use Aida, or you could use an even weaver linen, so a 16 Aida, or a 32 would be the count over 2 on linen or even weave. Now this is one that I did. This is Mini Mystery 03. And this is also a mandala that is done, and it was on a 16 count Aida. This is actually the very first one that I stitched. I'll zoom in here a little bit, and you can kind of see that there aren't a lot of places where there are densely packed beads. I mean, there's some around here, but there's no large areas Over here you've got some beads that are on vines. There's some beads around the perimeter here. But you're not trying to actually create an image with the beads. So this is one where a 16 count was just fine. I did it on white, but I think hand-dyed would have easily been acceptable as well. Now, if you've already started a project and I've set panic into your heart because you're starting to wonder if your project's going to work or not with all the beads on it, there are other options. You don't have to worry, all's not lost. Consider maybe using metallics instead of the beads. A lot of people are doing what they call mini mirrors, which are Mirabilias, which they actually use a smaller count, and it's just impossible. I mean, they're using 40 counts or 25 counts over one, and they just don't fit, and so you have to replace the beads with metallics. So you could work. You still have some shine, maybe not quite as shiny as a glass bead or something that's got facets on it, but it's an alternative. Or you could do a hybrid, replace some of the beads with metallics. So if you've got really densely stuff and they're gapped up and they look like they need orthodontia, it's going to look better if you use some metallics with a combination of beads. So you do have options, so hopefully that's not going to be a problem for you. And one of the other things that you want to probably do before you get started stitching is take a look at the Chatelaine.de website and look at their errata list, and the Chatelaine gallery also will list things that people have reported that are issues with certain designs. So if there's any corrections or errors or substitutions that they recommend, discontinued materials, especially if you're sourcing your own, you're going to want to know that up front. For example, the Beaded Peacock Tile, there was a situation that I found on the Chatelaine gallery that it showed that they had the same number for two different symbols of beads, and that clearly was not what was intended. And when I got the kit from ECC, European Cross Stitch Company, they were just going off the materials list as well, which had the two symbols with the same number on it. So I didn't get the one group of beads. Well, I found some in my stash, so I was fortunate enough that way. And I did contact them, and they would have replaced them for me if I needed them to. But I found some. So, but just be aware that if there's something that's not correct in the chart, you want to know about that sooner than later. So I alluded a little bit to when to bead, and some people do bead as you go. I think most people choose to wait till the end. And the reason to wait till afterwards is you're done with your cross stitching, you're done with your special stitches, you're done with your back stitching. And there's really two reasons for this. One, you don't want to crush your beads in your Q-snap or your scroll rods. You can use batting or felt to keep those things from being crushed. But to pad it when you put your clamps on. But the other thing you don't want to do is get snagged. I did this with Beaded Peacock Tile. When I was done with everything and then I was doing my beading, the seed beads, little tiny glass seed beads, are usually not as big a problem to either fit the clamps under or catching your floss on. The Beaded Peacock Tile, these big beads here, I'll try to tip it a little bit so you can kind of see the profile. They stand up quite a bit from the fabric. And the middle one here too. So you want to make sure, because I was catching on those all the time. So that's one consideration. Based on that, you may also want to work, I would have left the middle to the last had I done it over again. I did those fairly early on. But you might want to work from either left to right or top to bottom, just so you're not dragging your floss over those beads that you've already done. So that's a consideration for where and when to bead. So another thing that you probably want to do before you start beading, and actually I do this before I start my project and before I start beading, is to iron or press your fabric. Now, if you've got fabric that's been folded up and or wrinkled up or anything, I find that if I start stitching over those creases, they're there. I've cemented them in. It's really hard to get them out after the fact. So I will, before I put a stitch into a fabric, I will make sure it's flat and is possible. And then after I've done my stitching, but before I started my beading, I want to give that one more press, because I can actually get it really flat and, you know, steam it or iron it as well as I can. When you have beads on there, it gets bumpy and you probably have to put a towel over it to protect the beads. So it just makes it harder to do that once you've got your beads on there. So once I've got it all pressed, I can put it on a scroll rod or a Q-snap and it's going to hold it more taut, and so there's going to be minimal pressing that I need to do after the fact, maybe just around the edges. One other thing that I use is Mary Ellen's Best Press Starch. And I learned about this on Wendy's Whimsical Stitches Flosstube channel. And this is a non-flaking, non-clogging, soil-resistant, and acid-free starch. And it does a really good job of getting things out of the fabric. Now, I would be careful about using this when I've already got stitches in there, because if I've got hand-dyed flosses that may not be color fast, I would worry because it is a liquid, so I'd be worried about maybe things running. So I'd maybe, you know, try to blot this on a towel and apply it that way, just on the back, just to take precautions. You know, I don't want you to be spraying it on there liberally and all of a sudden it's smeared your whole, all your stitching. So be careful with that, but just a suggestion, because I found it really useful, at least before I put my beads in there, or before I've done anything. Yeah. Next, let's talk about placement and orientation of beads. Now, if you've ever done chatelaine, you know that you get charts for your cross stitch, and then the information, there's special instructions, usually written instructions about how many plies to use for back stitching and what colors to use, and there's information about the specialty stitches. There's diagrams for how to do it, and so you've got all the information on there to do all of that stuff. And then Martina would usually put a little line in there and say, now it's time to bead, have fun, and that's all the information that you get. So I was very apprehensive about doing this because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to line things up the way I saw them. I looked on the Chatelaine gallery, and these things were lined up just like soldiers. They were in formation, they were straight as an arrow, and I was concerned that I was going to be able to get them lined up and have it look the way I wanted it to look. So that's why I took my time and learned as much as I could about beading before I started this one. Because when I looked, you know, you can have beads that go vertical, you can have beads that go horizontal, you can have beads that go diagonal to the left, beads that go diagonal to the right. So, and then there's, you know, round beads and all of those kinds of things. So making sure that you know how you want your beads positioned is important. Now, you may want consistency and do everything all the same all the way throughout your design. If I was doing something like doing them on a diagonal, like for Mirabilia, it probably would look better to have them all straight, just like you're going to have your legs of your cross stitch always crossing the same way. Probably diagonal beads should all be set a certain way. But with chatelaines, it's a little bit different because you've got different things. There's almost like vignettes that can be scattered around that maybe you would do things a little differently. Now, before I did start doing the Beaded Peacock Tile, I went over and looked at the Chatelaine gallery, and I saw that they had two different examples. One person had done their stitching of the beads, particularly on the peacocks. They were going horizontally. Other one had them done vertically. And so actually it was best of both worlds. I could look at both scenarios to see which ones I like better. And I'll put them both up here so you can see the difference between the two. And I think looking at it, I like the vertical look myself, and so that's what I chose to do. But you'll notice on these that not all of them are in the same direction. There's places where they're diagonal and where they're horizontal. So what I decided to do is kind of do a rough sketch of what I thought things should look like. When I mean rough, I mean rough. This is what I ended up sketching out. So here's my centerpiece here. Here's my 4 peacocks. There's kind of a border around here that equates to this border. Then I've got the eyes around this inner perimeter. There's some beading in the corners over here. And then there's the outer perimeter, which looks like this. So any place that there are representations of beads, I looked and saw what they did, and I made some choices. So, like I said, I like the peacocks, and I kept with that. But you notice that the peacocks have these little, I don't know if you can see them because they're very light. Let me see. But they are kind of, you know, not antenna or whatever those things that stick out of a peacock's head. I've got those oriented this direction, and that direction on top of the ones below, and then in and out, inward toward the body, this way, for these little things that are on the head here. And then there are bugle beads all around the perimeter here, and those I put vertically here, but on the side I switched them to horizontally, obviously. This one's kind of a no-brainer because obviously you're going to have to match, so they vary based on the side you're doing. And some of this is inherent to mandalas because you do have repeating things and things happening on one side and a different thing on this side, etc. So then we look at the corners. Now on mandalas, because you're transitioning from one side to the other, I think putting things on the diagonal. So on the corners here, I put all of these bicones diagonally, and there's even some seed beads in here. And then down here there's two in this square, so I put one this way and one that way. So they're diagonal, but they're pointing away from each other. And so I carried that through the different sides, depending on whether it was pointing this way, these are pointing that way, these are pointing to the left, these are pointing to the right. And then on the corners themselves, there's just a couple of beads in here. This one's diagonal, but then these two are towards this side, so I put those the same way as I have the ones here, that these are horizontal here, but they're vertical here because they're matching what's around the perimeter. And these I put horizontal here, these are vertical here, and these are horizontal, vertical, horizontal. So you can kind of see kind of the logic. And then the other thing that are on here, the other elements, are the eyes, the peacock eyes. So you can see they're all lined up. On this side they're going vertically, and this side they're horizontal. But, if you turn this and you're looking just at this side, they are going to look the same, because it would look funny to have, it's a little counterintuitive if you're doing a chatelaine. You're so focused on not turning this because you want your legs, no matter what, they're all going the same direction. But beading, you kind of have to let that go a little bit and say, I really want to look at how the thing shows up and how things are looking on the mandala. And so beads kind of don't play by the same rules as the stitching does. So let's take a look at the really first serious beading job that I did. This is on Pompeii Gardens, and as you can see, I have kind of a combination of things going. This is the heavily beaded area. So this is a 28 count. They fit on pretty well, I think. It might have been a little bit more of a challenge had I been using a higher count fabric. But you can see in the corner here, these are on the diagonal, and they're a little higgledy-piggledy. It could be a little bit straighter. I could have done a better job, but then around them I chose to go horizontal here, vertical here, horizontal here, vertical here. Again, the corners are the dividing lines, and so you've got a clear separation by putting those on the diagonal. And then called for French knots, I chose to put black beads in here. A nice alternative. You don't like doing French knots, and a lot of us don't. Beads are a great alternative to that, especially if you're doing a bunch of them in one area, and if you mess one up, you have to start your thread over, and it's really kind of annoying. So this is a nice alternative to that one. So I kind of tip a little bit so you kind of get the sense of what the beads look like. And then I'll try to show you my Venice mandala. I'm not done beading this one. I ran out of some of the beads here, so I've got some beads here, and then I'm going to work around the outer perimeter. But I've got, you can see in the middle here, and I might tighten that up. This is one of the first ones I did. I'll zoom into the middle here where most of the beading is. And so I've got a bead stacked on top of a bead. And yeah, that needs to be shored up a little bit. Here's my beads at the diagonal, and then I've got vertical and horizontal going this way. And then around here, again, the perimeter matches whichever direction it's pointing. These up, these are sideways. These are up, these are sideways. And then same thing around here, these gold beads. These are the 24 karat ones. These are all, even though they're spun around in a circle, I didn't follow, get a little bit closer. I didn't have them chasing around. I put them all in the same direction, and then they just follow this spiral. And the spiral is created by the shape of the curl, not so much by the beads. I could have done them, it might have looked okay to have them go horizontal either. So 6 1/2 dozen, check the gallery to kind of get a feel for what looks best. Now we'll talk about the different tools that are available for beading. So once I've decided how my beads are going to go on there, and when I'm ready to bead, what kind of thread am I going to use for it? And so the answer is it depends. You could use different options even on the same piece. So you could use a transparent thread, Nymo or Nemo, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, it's Nymo. And I thought I had some around here. I know I've got some, but I don't use it myself. And so I put it somewhere, and because I don't use it, I don't know where it is. But it's invisible, and I couldn't really show it to you anyway because it's invisible. I think they do, it's typically kind of a whitish invisible but I think they have black too. So if you are working on like a black fabric, again, it's invisible, but transparent maybe is a better choice. I don't know, whatever the word is. Now the reason I don't use the invisible thread is, and I haven't really, it's probably not fair, I haven't used it, but I've heard stories that it can be a little more difficult to work with. One, because you can't see it. I have worked with, kind of, it's almost like a Krynic where it's very curly and it comes off a spool, and you can't see it because it's invisible, and so threading your needle and all that kind of stuff. So I've just chosen not to use it. The benefit is you might not be able to see it underneath the ends of the beads. So if you're using something else, you can see it coming in and out of the bead, or if it's a really transparent bead, you might be able to see it actually through the bead. It's also good to use if you're using, if you're doing stars in the sky, for instance, and you have to go one bead here, another one here, another one there, and you don't want it to travel. You have to travel between the beads behind the fabric, and you don't want that to show through. The other choice, you could use a DMC, and if you have that traveling scenario, you may want to choose a DMC color that is the same as the fabric itself, so when you travel underneath, it's not going to show because it's going to blend into the fabric. There are other times where if you use a DMC, you may want to match the DMC to the color of the bead, because if it's going to show through, if you've got a clear bead, you don't want to have a, if your fabric is green and your bead is clear, it's going to show through green through that. So you may want to switch it up a little bit if you're using DMC and use different colors for different times. Now what I have used, and I got this idea from, I wish I could remember, I thought I saved this and I can't for the life of me find it. Somebody on Instagram did a comparison, and she showed attaching beads using these different methods, and the one that she liked and the one that I tried and I'm satisfied with is just plain old sewing thread. So I've got some, plain old polyester thread, black. It comes in all kinds of different colors. You usually have it sitting around the house anyway. The reason I like it, it's strong, it's thin, it's lightweight. It feels less bulky to me than DMC, and so it feels like it lays flatter, and doesn't have as much give. It's more taut, so I can get them really to stay in place. The white is almost as invisible, especially on this project. I was doing it on white fabric, so it made it easy. As a matter of fact, I was fully intended to show you on this project and put the last beads in and finish one of these elements and bead it for you. And when I tried to do that, and I tried to film this the other day, and I was using white fabric, I was using white thread, and I couldn't see what I was doing on camera. I thought there's no way you guys are going to be able to see what I'm doing. So that speaks to how invisible this can kind of be on itself. So, so that is an option. So I'm going to actually, when I demonstrate stuff, I'm going to use contrasting colors. That's not going to look right, but at least you're going to be able to see what I'm doing. And then one other suggestion that I just ran across the other day on Facebook or somewhere. Someone had a really intriguing idea to use a metallic for your beading, which kind of add even more bling. And if you've don't mind seeing gold or whatever, silver or whatever the color, especially if you're using a metallic colored bead, that maybe that's really, you know, an interesting option. So I might think about that in the future. You know, there are metallic, this is a sulky 40 count like sewing thread, and this is kind of gold and shiny in color, so possibility that that might work as well. Now beads can come in different finishes. What I have here mostly are seed beads, and but there's different kinds of finishes. Things can be glass, so they're clear, they can be matte, they can be transparent, they can be opaque, they can be frosted, they can be metallic, and depending on the type of bead you're using, it may influence what you're going to use for your thread, because if you can see through it, it's a clear one, you may want to choose a thread that's going to not be as apparent. If it's a frosted or a opaque one, you probably don't care as much because you're not going to see that thread at all through it. Next, let's talk about needles. ECC typically will give you a little ribbon here that has a couple of needles in it. This is not the one I got. I managed to lose the needle I had gotten from the ECC kit while it was sitting here. I did not move, but somewhere it's in the general vicinity here, so I had to grab a different needle. But they give you a little needle and this big long pointy needle. This little needle is actually Bowen is what I've heard recommended from people. Got it off a 1-2-3 stitch. It's a 28 count tapestry needle. So I'm trying this out for the first time with you guys. I made sure that a bead fits through it, so I think we'll be okay. I like the little needles. These big, long needles are scary dangerous. They're extremely pointy. The eyes are not huge. It's not too bad. You can get it through there. Can you see that underneath there? So they're not terrible to bead, but I just worry about poking myself, you know, and bleeding all over my project. So they're a little frightening. I also think it's a little harder to maneuver with a smaller one. You can get things around, but there are times if you're doing a very tightly packed area, maybe this big needle would be helpful, but I try to avoid that as much as possible. So what's my setup for beading? Now this Beaded Peacock tile, I think it's only 9 by 9, so it fits nicely in an 11 by 11. This is what my preferred stitching device is a Q-snap, it's 11 by 11 Q-snap, so I stitch everything, even the big huge ones. I stitch an 11 by 11 and just move it around. This one I have to move around very much at all. So when it came time to beading, it still got a little close to the edges, so what I typically do is I will take a smaller Q-snap, and if I'm working on a particular side here where I'm having trouble getting here, I will take the smaller clasp, clamp, trying to say clasp and clamp at the same time. It's a little bit smaller. I will put it maybe down here. I'm working up here, so that gives me a little more play. Or sometimes I'll just do 3 sides, so I can access this a little more easily front and back. But I've got 3 other sides holding it taut. So that's a good way to do that. So I'll just switch it around if that's the case. Now you may wonder about really big size things. And when I beaded Pompeii Gardens, what I did is I've got a big 17 by 17 Q-snap, and you can get extenders and stuff and make them bigger if you need to. I think this thing is like 21 inches or something like that wide, and so I've clamped onto the top here, and once I was working, like I mentioned before, maybe starting to the left and working down, or working top to bottom might be a good choice. But you've got stuff in the corners here. This one I think I started in the middle and worked my way out. This one's not real heavily beaded except for the centerpiece. So, and again, if you leave the crystals off, the seed beads you're not going to catch on, so that's not as big a thing. So actually I did all this stuff, and I left the border for last and the corners for last. But then when I got to the point where, okay, now it's time to do the corners, and so I would just do this setup where I've got it on here, but I'm only clamped really on this top side, and I've got this over here as well. And a tool that I have, I'm going to have to show you a picture of this because I can't get it quite in the shot. This is called a Rocky Giraffe stand, and it's adjustable stand. It's, the head tilts, and it's got these kind of jaws between here that I can make tighter, or you see that a little bit. And I've got a number of different adjustable places that I can, you know, make it taller or bend it more, you know, down or up. Similar to a Lowry stand kind of thing. I'm not a big floor stand person because I like to move around a lot, and I don't like to have a big thing sitting there all the time. But this one, what I do use is when I'm beading with a big frame like this, I will just use it and prop it up in here. So hopefully you can see this setup. So now I can get in and out, you know, to put my beads across the top here, and in the corner over here, and work, you know, and turn it around if need to. So I'm trying to get to this corner over here. Now I can spin it over here, and I don't have to worry it being hooked onto a frame and stuff. So I can just take it out, flip it over, put it back on, maneuver it around. So it's really just kind of something I can position it against. So this is a beading mat, and it's just a little square piece of silicone, I think it is, but it's sticky. It's got this little cellophane cover on it in the front and back. I've heard them called tacky bobs, I've heard them called tacky bills occasionally. What I do is I just have a CD case. If you still have CD cases sitting around the house, you can use this. I found this plastic one with rounded edges because the hard plastic ones, one, they tend to break, and they've got pointy edges that, you know, you catch on and stuff, so don't like those as well. But this one's nice. So you just peel off the back of it and set it on here. It's repositionable if you don't get it quite right, and just set it on there and kind of push it down a little bit, and you can see that it's not going anywhere. Now the only problem with the CD case is it's got this hole in the middle, so you may want to keep your little plastic sheet that they give you to cover it, and set that on there when you're not using it and covering it up so that doesn't, you know, get through there. Yeah, the only other thing with this is there's also this little bump here that makes the top, so it's hard to put stuff right in the middle with this particular CD case, but it's the best case I've found so far. And the brand name on here is Beadalon. You can find these at Michael's or 123 Stitch, usually around about $5 or $6. So maybe in the jewelry making section of Michael's you might find it. As you're going along, these things will pick up lint and stuff, and they'll become less sticky over time as you're working. So just peel it off, run it under some water, leave it to dry, and it's brand new. It's an amazing thing. It's a miracle. It's mystery tech. I don't know what. I don't think silicone is inherently sticky, so I don't know what's on it, but it's pretty amazing. We'll get that position back up there. And I've actually found this little square mesh bag. I just throw it in here when I'm not using it, so I can leave beads on there if I like to. Zip it up. Next time I need it, I just open it up again. Another tip that I got from Catherine, who is the needleberry stitcher, is she actually took a ring, and I've got one here I haven't made into yet, but I found the biggest, ugliest, gaudiest thing, and I'm going to pop out the piece here and get my husband to do that. And then she cut a piece of tacky bob and put it in the middle here so that she can just put this ring on, and as she stitches she can just, you know, grab a bead off of here and, you know, stitch as she goes without having to go pick up the mat every time and do that. So I thought that was kind of a clever idea. I'm going to work on doing that. Another thing that I heard somebody recently suggest is putting double stick tape around their hand. So basically kind of the same thing as a tacky bob, but you just got double stick tape around there. Another idea is somebody took a shallow tin and they put like a roller lint sheet on it, so it was kind of that stickiness kind of thing. They could write the numbers of the beads right on that, and they held it in place with magnets so it didn't slide around. So because it wasn't sticky on both sides, they just, you know, used the magnet to do that. So the way I use my tacky bob is I position my beads on here by number, and I'll do usually, like, depending on how many beads there are, but I'll do like 3 across, and then 3 across the middle, and then 3 across the bottom. You know, kind of, if you think of like almost a Sudoku square where you've got, you know, 3 by 3 squares that have 9 total numbers in it. If you have more than that, maybe you go 4 across and have 3 or 4 rows, whatever you have to do. And then what I also do is I create a little cheat sheet for myself here, where I have my number This is my symbol. Chatelaine's, the naming convention for beads, is typically she would use numbers, so 1 through 9. Now, one other thing to be aware of, 6s and 9s on a chart can look very much the same, so when those are both used on a chart, you want to keep an eye out for those. And even the 1s and the 7s can kind of look similar. Sometimes the formatting of the 1 kind of looks like one of those European ones where they kind of have a curly one, little tail on it on the top. So keep an eye out for those because you want to use the right colors for those when you're choosing your beads. And then under each one I will write the number of the bead and then the name, the color of the beads, so that when I'm searching through my vials, if I'm looking for bead number 1, yeah, it's 1005, but it's also blue, green, gold, so that I don't have to look through the purples and the golds and everything else. I'm looking for the blue, green, gold, and I can find that more easily. If she didn't have enough single digits, and there's more beads than that, usually she next, for the seed beads at least, would go through punctuation. So here's a dollar sign, here's an at sign, here's a percentage sign. I've drawn a line here because these are all the seed beads, and that's the bulk of the beads that you're going to have on there, the smaller beads. And I'll talk more about different brands and different kinds of beads and those kinds of things. But then the specialty ones down here, there were some bugle beads, that's kind of a star. And then lowercase letters are what she typically used for, they're bigger than usually the big one that goes right in the middle is a capital letter. These are the real large size ones. She used a letter D for the centerpiece one. I have one of those. But then lowercase letters for the other kinds of crystals. So where they're usually like a bicone or something like that. So those are kind of the naming conventions when you're doing a chatelaine. And a lot of times these crystals are all together in one vial. So all of these down here were in this particular one container. So you have like Caribbean blue opal, and it tells you how many. So it shows you there's 5 of those in here. And I think it calls for 4 of them, so they give you 1 extra. Olivine, it says 2XAB, 5. The 2X stands for two-sided, so that sometimes they have a kind of a dull or a matte side on some things, but a two-sided means you could put it either way, so it doesn't matter if you have it up or down, it's going to look the same on both sides. And then got a couple of those ABs, and there's an AB round, there's 4 of those, crystal ones, and then there's an Aeronite AB round, and there's 1 of those. So some of these, you know, Caribbean blue and olivine, I can tell the difference between some of those. But there was an aurum, and I have no idea what color aurum is, A-U-R-U-M. And so by process of elimination, I can figure out Caribbean blue looks like a bright blue, and olivine is kind of a green. So by process of elimination, I figured out that the gold they had was aurum gold, and there was another one that I was doing on another chart was called Roscaline gold, and I could tell that they provided 18 of those versus 4 of the others, or 5 of the others. So it just kind of have to do a little bit of you know, how many of these do I have? Well, maybe it's this one. How many of those? You know, so sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to figure out what you're dealing with. And so I've got these here. You know, you can cut this out and tape this into the back of the thing. Dawn TCB just mentioned this to me recently, and she actually cuts these out and puts them under the mat so that you can see through them which ones they are. And so that works out pretty well. If you're putting stuff into pattern keeper, beads typically don't show up just because of the way. Sometimes they will. Sometimes you'll see the numbers. Sometimes you won't. So it really is kind of depending on how things were charted, and you may or may not see bead numbers or information on your pattern keeper chart. They typically aren't going to be selectable. If you do see that there's a number on there that corresponds to a bead, they're not going to be selectable or highlightable or checked off. They won't be included in your stitch count. This is typically how the kits will come. You can buy the bead kits from European Cross Stitch Company, and they come in these little tubes here. And this is actually leftover beads from the Pompeii Gardens one. So you can see that, you know, they give you enough. They do it by weight. So here, this one is 1.5 grams that they gave me here. I did notice in one that I did is I ran out of beads because they were 24 karat gold. And so I think they were heavier, and so I didn't have enough to finish, and they were very kind about sending me some others out. So, but yeah, you don't have to worry about making sure you don't drop them. The only ones are the bigger ones. They may not give you more than, they might give you a few extra, like the crystals, but the centerpiece typically they give you 1 bead for that, so you want to be careful with those. So these are left over. So I'll go through, and what I do is I will put them in a case. And so this is, I use a smaller one. This is not, it's kind of like a floss bobbin case, but it's a little smaller, and it holds the vials in pretty nicely. And it's Plano stowaway, 7 fixed compartments. And so this is what I found that's really useful for when I'm doing beading. So if I look inside, I've got my numbered things here. They kind of correspond to that. So I've got my 1005, 1006, so that's the second one. Number 3 is 609, 459. So I can kind of go through and figure out what number they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. This is the one that they had the same number twice, and I found one in my stash in a different container, so that's why this is not in one of these. And so I will position these based on what I'm going to need. So let's say if I look at my chart, and I'm going to show you doing part of the eye. I won't show you the whole thing because it takes a long time to do. So let's go ahead and get started with beading some stuff. I'm going to take my container of beads here, and I'm going to choose what I want. So for this particular design, I'm going to need some 6s. So I'm going to put those over in the right-hand corner here. I'm going to need some symbol number 1. So I'll put those up in the upper right-hand corner. So you want to dump some out. You don't want to use a ton of them all at once because this mat is going to get unsticky, or it's going to get some lint on it to make it progressively less sticky. And so I want to dump some out and pat them down there because you want to, they'll roll around on you if you don't kind of give them a little patting down. And then I'm going to need some number 7s. So I look at my little cheat sheet, and I'm going to put those, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 goes in this lower corner over here. And I got to have another row because I'm going to need a few more. Whoops. I'll shake that out. And they do kind of run around on you. I usually try to do this like on a couch or something, so then when I'm done I go pick them up. You know, I can pick them up from underneath me. Let's see, there are some dollar signs. So I'm going to put this in the lower left-hand corner because this is the dollar sign area according to my little chart that I made. So I've got some @ that's 175. It's an emerald color. So I look here at my listing here of the 175s are over here. And then I need an 8, the 24 karat golds. So that is 508. Here's my collection here. In the middle-ish bottom. Kind of avoiding that little bump there. And I need some 5s. So that's 458. It's a dark teal. And one more is 609. This goes in the number 3 spot. Up in this corner up here. So I've got my beads laid out here, and you really kind of want to be careful on some of these. Like I can tell the golds apart from the purples and the bluish, but there's some of these like this one and this one, and these, they look so similarly, especially when you're dealing with one little bead at a time. So if something rolls off and lands on the couch and I pick it up later, I have a hard time telling. Or even here, if things start to blur a little bit, I want to keep those as separate as possible. To avoid me running into, not knowing which bead it is. The purples are over across from each other, so those I'm not too worried about. So I'm going to show you basically how I applied these vertical beads for one of these eyes. So I'm going to do a couple of these rows. Now the approach I did with this is I didn't like pick out a bead. I didn't say, okay, there's several ones in here, so I'm going to put all the ones in, and then I'm going to work around here. Because it gets really hard to work in between beads. So what I did is I worked left to right, because I'm right-handed, and I did one row of beads here, and I made just one pass through the bead the first time and came back up. Then I started the next row and went down and up, and kind of worked my way over. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So I'm going to get myself a thread, and I'm going to demonstrate this on a piece of Aida because I think it'll be a little easier to see what's going on, even though I did this on a linen or if you do an Evo weave. You're familiar if you're stitching a chatelaine, you probably already know enough about over twos where you actually, instead of one square here that you can see one clear square bordered by 4 holes, you're going to go essentially up 2 and over 2 when you make your X's. And basically a seed bead is going to cover the same area as a cross stitch. So if you think about it, you'll see, one little square that would be equivalent of a stitch on your chart, and that's where your bead goes. So you're going to essentially do the same thing, is do a cross stitch. You're just going to have a bead right in the middle of it for these seed beads. So I'm going to go over 1. In reality, you would go over 2 if you were using a linen or a weave and weave. I just thought it might be a little easier with the bigger holes to see what I'm doing, because like I said, I tried to demonstrate this on the actual project and it didn't work. That's why I'm also using the black thread. It's going to look weird, but you can see how it looks in real life. It's going to look weird, but I think it'll be easier for you to follow what I'm doing. So I'm going to take a section of thread. I'm going to try to do as much of an element. I don't want to have to anchor it a lot of times. So you could possibly do like a waist knot, if you're familiar with that, where you tie a knot in it and you come up, or actually I think you go down from off in the distance, and then you do all your beading, and eventually, because you're running over that thread a bunch of times, it's going to anchor itself out. I haven't done that. I think it's more of a needlepoint technique, but it is an option for you if you wanted to do that. But I'm going to show you what I do, basically cross stitch, but with a bead in the middle. So here's my thread. So I've got it zoomed in pretty close here. Hopefully you'll be able to see. So I'm going to start on that particular, I'll put the chart up here so you can kind of follow along with me to see that section of the chart, not the whole thing, but just the eye. And so I'm going to come down. Let's say that this is the row, the solid row of stitching, and I come down solid row of stitching. So I'm going to come down 1, 2, 3, and come up through here, and I'm going to go, and this is the row that I want to stitch in. So I'm going to come to the top right of the row I want to stitch in. I grab my bead and I come down the lower left hand side, just like I'm doing a regular stitch, just like a regular cross stitch. And on a linen I'd go over 2, on Ada I'm going over 1. And that's about the size of a bead. That kind of tells you if you're in the right spot. So I do that, and because I'm going to do this, I'm going to do one whole row down. So I'm going to come up from the bottom right next to it, because this is my first bead. I'm going to anchor it, just like you normally would. And then I'm not going to cross back over. I'm just going to keep going down. So next one up is another 6. So I take my 6 off of my tacky bob here. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm zoomed in here, so it's a little hard to see. But I grab my number 6 off of my tacky bob, and I go down diagonally from that and pull that through. So now I've got them 2 next to each other. Make sure that it's pulling through until I get 3 or 4 stitches in there. I want to make sure that I'm really catching that tail, and so it's securing my beads. So I've got a couple through the back here now, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. So the next thing on my chart says I need number 9. So I'll go down here to the lower rightish corner. Oops. Pick that bead up, and I'm going to go down the right corner there. Do one more 9. And then there's a 5 that goes below that. If these beads don't look quite right, I ran out of a couple of the 6s, so I'm using a slightly different bead for the first 2 in this row. But then I'm going to take my 5s and run there. So now I've got my first row done. They're diagonal. I want them to look vertical. I want them to stand up straight. So I'm going to go back over like I was going to add another one down below that, just to the right where I came down, over one. And I'm going to come up, and I'm going to do a cross stitch. So I'm going to go through the bead, You see all the way through, and then I come down the upper left-hand side. And you see how that one's starting to straighten up already. So I go up to the right of where I came down and put it in here. I'm going to work my way up, and I'm going to go through this bead. And I don't have to pull it all the way through like I did last time. I can just kind of see that hole. Saves me a little bit of time. And pull that one straight. And just keep going like that. The reason I do it, half of it I think is psychological, because they go in, I do one row and they're in one place, and then when I come back, this end is so much quicker, so I feel like I'm going faster. I'm getting this whole row stitched back, because now that they're in place, it's not as futzy. So when you have to do it one by one and then you do the full cross on each individual bead, it just seems like everything takes a long time. And this way you can make sure that they are lining up like you'd expect them to. So there's my first row, and they look pretty straight. So now the next row is one up and to the right. So I'm going to pick this up here. I'm going to grab bead number 6 symbol off of here. And I'm going to go down to the left. And so just the basic same thing here. I'm not going to, pick all the 6s out and stitch all the 6s, because there's, some down here and up here and over here, and even, inside. It would just be harder. So I just want to do one whole row at a time. So now I got 3/8 in a row. 1, 2, and I'll just do these 2 rows, and then I'll speed it up for you here, and I'll show you the finished output. But you see how nicely that these beads stack up. And this is the Delica beads that are called for. Some seed beads are just rounded, and so these really lend themselves to stacking themselves neatly in a row. And now I pick up a 6. A 9. And an @ sign. Okay, so you can see these are straight, these are crooked. So now I come to just like I did before, come to the other side, pull through and go to the top. And this is where you can see where the left to right, you might want to go right to left if you're left-handed, but this way I don't have all this stuff over here, so it's easier to do this. And straighten them out this way. It's just a little more challenging when you get 2 rows next to each other. So now you're seeing how those line up next to each other very nicely. One other technique I've heard about, I don't know if it would work so well with this application. I haven't done it myself because I haven't found a good place to do it. But somebody mentioned doing a basket weave. So like this one would be vertical, this one would be horizontal, this one would be vertical, this one would be horizontal. And then right next to it you'd have different. This one, if this one was vertical, this one would be horizontal. This one was horizontal, this one would be vertical. And so if you had like a square area, it might be an interesting idea. So something to think about. For this, I think the application, lining them all straight next to each other, was the right way to go. If I were to be doing these as horizontal, I would do the kind of the same principle. I would come up where I want it to be. I would put my bead through there, and this time I want it to go, I'm going to go top to the right, and then I would go from the left bottom, top to the right bottom, bottom left to the top right by passing through the bead in the middle. So now you see that this is going this way, where these guys are all going straight. So just depending on the orientation that you want your bead to go in is what you would do. So if I would do that, I would just, if I had a whole row of them, I would do all the one leg for the whole row and then come back and cross them the other direction. So let's talk a little bit about seed beads, because not all seed beads are created the same. There are different things, different manufacturers, different sizes. You might see numbering on the packaging that says that they're 11/0 or they're 15/0. This is important to know, and sometimes they're not even included on the packaging, which I find maddening. They'll, like from Mill Hill, for instance, just has a range of numbers. And I have this chart that I'll show you in a minute that shows you what size they are. But if you have a package of Mill Hills, once you take them out of the box and store them in something, you want to make sure you write down what size they are, because you don't know other than having to measure them later, which you probably don't want to do. And maybe by size you can visually tell, but they'll have a number on that says either typically 11/0, sometimes 10/0, or 15/0 is the other one. So the first number is the number of beads that will fit in an inch. So if I were to put them side by side, an 11/0 bead is going to fit 11 across an inch. So they're bigger beads. It can't fit as much in an inch. The 15/0 means that it will cover, 15 will cover 1 inch, so they'll be a little bit smaller. And then the second number, the 0, a 0 means they're a seed bead. So the 11/1, because they're a little bit bigger, they're about 2.1 millimeters, and the 15.0 is a 1.5 millimeter. The Miyuki Delicas also are the ones that come in at 10/0. So Chatelaines typically call for Delicas, and these are under the brand name Miyuki. They're usually round seed beads. These are a little more cylindrical than Mill Hill seed beads are, because Mill Hills are a little more round. I've got some examples I'll show you. The hole sizes are also larger on Delicas, and Mill Hill does make a Magnifica bead, though, that's more comparable to the Delicas. So if you're having trouble finding the Delicas, they have a little more of a square edge, but that's what lines them up so nicely, using the cylindrical ones as opposed to the round ones. So I've got a number of beads laid out here. Let me see if I can wrangle these, and hopefully you can tell the difference between this. I've got it on a piece of 80 here, so you can kind of get a sense of scale. This first one here, this is one of the Delicas that came with the Chatelaine kit. So I'm going to put that on my needle here so you get a feel for that one. See, it's cylindrical in size, but it is kind of rounded. Next one up I'm going to pick up here, this purple one, this one is a Mill Hill, and that's their Magnifica. So it's similar because it is cylindrical, and they stack up okay. They're just slightly different in size, so you probably want to keep with the same brand. The third one I have here this is just a seed bead. This is a Mill Hill seed bead. Now here you can really see the difference. This is much rounder than these Magnifica or Delicas. So if you just use it out of the box, a seed bead from Mill Hill, that's the difference. And this is an 11/0. I'll talk about the size in a minute. And this is a 15/0. It's the size. So you can see that how different they are. This, I believe, is also a Mill Hill, but just more delicate I shouldn't use the word delicate because they have delicates, but it's just a tinier size. So if you're dealing, this is another solution for you. If you have fabric that you're finding too small, you can size it down to the smaller size beads. Unfortunately, these are the rounder ones as opposed to the cylindrical ones that stack very nicely. If you're putting them on diagonally, it doesn't matter too much. So hopefully that gives you a sense of the different size beads. And I did find a nice chart. I'll put it up here that shows the mill hill numbering ranges if you are interested in mill hills. Mill hills are probably more available, so if you're trying to source them yourself, but this might help you in general if you're doing bead organization. So the range of 00020 to 02095, those are glass seed beads. I can tell that because the next number here shows me they're 11/0 for this particular range. It means there's 11 to an inch and they're 0, so they're glass seed beads. Description is they're small and they're round. It's a 2.5 millimeter, and you get about 500 in a package on those. Next up is the 03002 through 03063. Those are antique seed beads. Those are also 11/0. They're small, round, they're 2.5. Those are about 275 per packaging. Then the next range is the 4,000s essentially, or 40,000s essentially, 4020 through 45-270. Those are petite glass seed beads, and those are your 15/0 ones. Still a seed bead, but they're smaller in size. They're about 2 millimeters, and there's 500 per package on the typical mill hill packaging. And then we have 05021 through 05557. Those are glass pebble seed beads. Those are 3/0, so you only get 3 beads per square. So those are bigger. They're larger, round. Those are not typically, I've not seen those in cross-stitch beading very much. And they're 5.5 millimeter. It didn't say how many per package they typically are in. Then we've got the 60,000 series. Those are your frosted glass seed beads. So 11/0, again, means the same size as we've seen above. They're small, they're round, 2.5 millimeter, and they're 500 per packaging. The only thing different is they're the frosted ones, so they're a little more, not quite see-through, but not quite opaque. Then there's 7,000 through the 9,200 are their bugle bead numbering, and those are the 11/0. They're a cut glass cane, and so they're 2.5 millimeters to 11/0. So apparently have different sizing, and those are about 135 per packaging. And then the other type that they have for mill hill is their Magnifica. Those are equivalent to the 15/0s. They're uniform, small, cylindrical with large holes and thin walls, and 2.25 per 5 millimeters, and they didn't have a packaging size specified. So I thought that was a handy chart for mill hill stuff, regardless of what even if you're using delicas, sometimes you use mill hills. And I'll also put another link in that I found that shows the form and the size and everything that will be in the notes. So I've got some other examples of some beads. It'll be a little hard to see. I'm going to put my needle through this one. This is a bugle bead. These are tubular. These actually, I've noticed, were a little bit fragile. So you want to be careful with these. They're not tubular beads. They're equivalent of an 11/0 seed bead with a 2.5 millimeter diameter. So it's a cut glass cane essentially that covers 1 square wide and then 2 squares long. So it's kind of just a rectangular looking piece. Next we have bicones, or sometimes they're called rondelle crystals. They're 3D faceted rounder beads. Let's put this on the needle to see if you can see it a little bit better. That are larger than seed beads. So typically you're going to see a 4 millimeter or a 6 millimeter. So if you've got 2 different sizes on your chatelaine, that might give you a clue as to which one they're talking about. 4 millimeter will be smaller, 6 millimeter will be a little bit bigger. And usually these are going to cover a 3x3 square area. And again, these are typically ones that work, I think, probably better as a diagonal, as one of those separation areas. You'll see that those are typically used in those situations. Sometimes they'll be noted as AB, and what that stands for is Aurora Borealis. So it's a special iridescent color that it's got a rainbow-like coating that shimmers, and it's got maybe multiple colors in it, so it's kind of mimicking the Northern Lights. So that's why you'll see the AB. That's what that stands for. I mentioned the two-sided. They're not coated on one side. This one happens to be a two-sided. I couldn't find an example of a two-sided one. And if you're looking to source things, Swarovski crystals are usually, a lot of the bicones are done, but they have restricted their supply in 2021, so you can't get those as readily for cross-stitch stuff. So you might have to look at some alternative brands. Preciosa was a Czech company that makes things, so I think those are the requested, or the suggested replacement for the bicones if you can't get them from Swarovski. And then this one here is a bigger round crystal. Usually this is, this is an example of one that's a one-sided. You can see the back side here is, well, even though it's kind of shiny, it's not this kind of iridescent kind of a shiny look to it. So you'll figure it out. But that's, if it said 2X, both of these sides would look the same instead of one being more matte. And this is typically going to be what you're going to put in the middle. And so we'll talk about how to apply all of these onto your thing. I will include in the description box a really useful link from Fire Mountain Gems that has a lot of information about bead sizes and shapes and manufacturing information and that kind of stuff. So if you're looking to source things, that will be useful. I've seen some cubes. Sometimes I don't have an example of one. I know that there's some in the Pompeii ones, but I didn't seem to have any leftovers of that. And then there's another one that's called a tila bead, which is kind of similar to that. This one's a little bit different in that it's got, can you see that? It's got two sets of holes that go on either side. So it's more of a rectangular, or excuse me, a square that you can place, and it'll go through, run through both of those sides. And that typically is going to cover a 3x3 square as well. So let's apply a bugle bead. This one's a little different technique. So because I'm demonstrating this on Aida, I have to do it a little bit differently than I would on a linen versus a even weave, because typically I'm going over two, so I have one, and there's a hole in the middle, and then there's the other side of that area. Because I'm doing it on linen, one square, I only have, the 4 holes on either side of that square. So I'm going to have to go up kind of right in the middle between those two. Oops, takes a little work to get it in there, but the top right between those two holes. And this is where a nice sharp bead comes in handy, which you typically have when you're beading. Seems not too bad. So I come up there, I put my bead on, and because these are longer, this is the equivalent of twice as wide. So then I'm going to go down not one, but I'm going to go 2 squares down on Aida and pull that through. Now you can see here, because I'm demonstrating with the black, this is not a great choice because the thread's showing right through. If I were working on black fabric, it might not be so bad, but it's still gonna, show through. It's not gonna look right. You really probably want to use either a clear, either one of those invisible threads that kind of floats on the fabric, or one that matches. This is a light blue bead, so maybe you use a light blue thread, or a white thread might not be as obvious. I used white thread on that because I was using on the Beaded Peacock Tile, because it was white fabric, it didn't show through. So I'm going to come back up one more time, the same hole I came through. So I want to anchor it down on the other side here, just like I normally would do for any cross stitch. And I'm going to leave maybe a little bit longer tail because it's not, it might pull through because I'm just going through, I'm not going through at an angle, I'm just going up and down. I'm going to make a second pass through here. And then I'm going to go back down the bottom and do that. Now, if that was the only bead I was doing, then I would do, do my anchoring just like you normally would do. Slide your needle under there, possibly more than once, because like I say, this is not very secure. But hopefully I'm going to put another one right next to it there. And so if I go over one spot on the Beaded Peacock tile, there was a section between each one. So here are there was a road stitch between each one. So I'd have something to anchor my stuff under because I'm going to have other threads there. But I would go over like 3 squares to the other side of that road stitch, and now I can come up over here and put it right in the middle, and now I've got a little bit more to anchor my thread on and pull that through, and it would be more secure. So I can put my next one on and keep going that way. Or even if you're doing some other things, maybe at the same time I was doing some of these beads, well, write down these beads, there were some other beads right below here that I could just kind of catch them as I went, as long as I'm using the same color thread. I try to do everything in an area once, just because the anchoring is not necessarily as secure, just because you don't have as much to go by. And that's the other reason for, making sure all your other stitches are in first, so you've got something else to put it under rather than just the thread you're dealing with to attach your bead. So next I'm going to show you to do a bicone. So this one I'm going to go, because I'm doing it on, again, Aida, it's going to be slightly different than linen. Typically, like I mentioned, it would cover kind of a 3x3 square if you're looking at the chart. So I'm going to come up, and depending on which way I want to go, if I want it to be oriented left to right, so it's kind of, I guess would be a forward slash, I'm going to go down to the lower left, and so it's positioned that way. If I wanted to go the other direction, I would start from where I'm going, and I would start here, put my bead on, and I would just go down the other direction. And on Aida here, I'm going to cover 2 squares because it's a little larger, depending on how big the bead is, so that goes through there. And I am going to make a second pass, and kind of the same situation I had with the bugle bead. I don't really have a real secure thing, so I'm going to leave this longer tail here till I can pick up some more stitches over it. And I'm just going to run it through again and go over the back side again, and hopefully the next time I do something nearby it, I'll be able to anchor that tail a little bit, because it's still kind of, oops, I almost pulled it through. You can see that you really have to be careful. Let's say I have a scenario where I just have one bead out in the middle and nowhere, nothing nearby it. I'm going to do a different approach. I'm going to do a loop start. If you're not familiar with loop start, this is the way I start all my stitches when I use 2 threads. So I'll just kind of double over my thread and leave the kind of the long part over here and the shorter part over here. And I'll go through where I want the bead to go, where I'm going to start my stitch, and I'm going to go through from the front. I'm going to hold this hole out here, the loop open, and because this is a bigger bicone, a bicone, it's going to be 2 threads, so I'm going to go up and over 2 squares because I'm on Aida. Otherwise I would go over further if I was doing it. And then I'm going to go through the loop, and it's going to pull. I'm going to see this loop kind of here, and typically if I was starting my X, I would go back down the hole I came from. But before I do that, I'm going to slip my bead on here. Now my bead's here. Now I'm going to go back down that hole that I came from, and that's like starting the first leg of an X. And honestly, I've done this with DMC. It works a little easier with DMC. I'm struggling a little bit with the sewing thread doing this to demonstrate to you. So this might be one where a DMC attachment might be a little easier to work with. So then the other thing I want to do is I want to basically make an X. So I want to go to the lower right hand corner of where this bead is, and again I'm covering on Aida 2x2 square. And so I've come up in the lower right hand corner, and I'm going to separate this, like just if you're railroading, if you're familiar with that technique, where you kind of put your needle through and separate the threads when you're using 2 threads, and come over the other side. I'm going to hold that there while I do this, and it goes through the other side, and it holds it a little more securely. Now the only problem is it's a little more obvious, and that's where again I'm showing you this black thread just to demonstrate. It's not going to be as obvious if you have using a white or whatever color fabric you're using and match the thread to that. But again, this is a see-through bead, so I'm going to see the thread through it as well as around it. So if you're going to use that, sometimes this is the only thing you can do. If this bead's sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, you got nowhere to anchor it against. This gives it much more stability than just passing it through one direction, even if you go through a couple of times. And then I would just slip this under here and anchor that down like that, and maybe slip it through a couple of times and anchor that down. Next, we want to do beads that have just one hole in them. And it's like, well, how am I going to secure this one? So this is typically what would be used in the middle of your design. And so I'm going to go right to where I want it to be. Now, if you're using Ada, you may want to, if you want this to be right in the middle, you might want to use a sharp needle and kind of come right up and pierce up from the bottom. Closest you can get to the middle of that square. And this one has a good side and a bad side, so I'm going to go through from the bottom of the bad side so the shiny stuff's on top. And now if I go back through, I don't want to go over because it's going to show the thread. If I go straight through, it's just going to pull right out. So the trick for this is to use another bead to go on top of it, another little seed bead. Now, they don't tell you this, so they don't tell you what color to use, so you kind of want to decide, do I want the one that complements this, that kind of blends in? Do I want one that stands out a little bit? I've pulled just a blue one here. This one's got a lot of rainbow colors in it. I've pulled the thread up here a little bit, and I'm going to go all the way through. And I put my bead on here, and I'm going to go back through the same hole, and I'm going to try to get it just a little bit off the mark here. So if you can see, I'm not quite in the same spot. When I go back down, I'm going to pull that through, and there it's holding it in place. So now, however you want to tie that off or anchor it or do some other thing in the area, move over to your next bead somewhere nearby and do the rest of it. That's how I would apply that middle bead. So this is a Tila bead, and this is a little, kind of looks like a tile. It's got the two holes in it. Make sure that you look to see if there's a right side. This one looks like this probably is the better side over here. It's a little bit more raised on top. The other side was kind of flat, so I want that against the bottom. So I want to come up from where I want it to go. I'll go through here, keeping in mind that I want to make sure I got keep the top side up. And depending on, I think there's different sizes of these, so you want to see, how much does this cover? This looks like it covers 2 squares, horizontally and vertically. So I'm going to go down 2 squares on the Ada, which would be, different if you're doing it on an even weave. And so I pulled that through. And then I'm going to go up to the upper right hand corner and go over to, again, we want to anchor it off in the back. This is a little easier to do because I'm at an angle, so it's going to catch more, but it's still not the tightest in the world. So leave yourself a good long strand there. And I go through the other side. Catch the hole. Catch the hole, run it through, and go down the other side. So now it's nice and tight on there because I'm going through both sides of that. So just up, down, over to the top again, and top down, or you can go top down, top up. And again, just fasten it off in the back like you normally would do. So if you're planning on sourcing your own materials, I mentioned the Chatelaine website, the chatelaine.de website has materials lists available, and so you can download those from them, and without having to buy a chart, you'll see what all you need, including beads. You can kit up and just buy the bead packs alone from European Cross Stitch Company, and you can also buy Gloriana separately and NPI Silk separately, and specialty stitches separately, so all those things are broken out depending on what you want to buy, but you can just buy the beads directly from them, and that's probably the easiest. They've got everything, they know how much you need, it's one place to source it from, you don't have to worry about shipping costs from multiple places. Some other sources for beads, Lima Beads, Lima beads.com, caravanbeads.com, firemountaingems.com that has the link that I'll include here. Everythingcrossstitch.com sells, 123stitch.com sells beads. 123 does not sell the delicate beads that are typically used on chatelaines. So you might have to go run these other sources to get some of those if you can try to source those themselves. But those are what you get from ECC, the delicate beads. And even Michael's, like I say, go in the jewelry making section and you might find a lot of beads that you need from your craft store. Now let's talk about organization of beads. This is something I'm still trying to get my hands around, but I'm feeling much more confident now. I think just even going through the process of learning about beads and different sizes and things, I struggled for a long time with how am I going to put my things away. I tried different containers, and I'll show you the different things that I've gone through and what worked and what didn't, and not everything works for everybody, so maybe I'll show you something you haven't seen before and you think, oh, that seems fantastic. First of all, it's kind of almost a hard-sided, it's on wheels. It's a suitcase essentially, but it's got this roll top feature to it. So this might make a little noise, but it goes up and covers up. So it's just kind of almost like a roll top desk, and then I can roll it back down, and I can see everything that I have in here, which is kind of nice with beads, because usually if you're doing stuff from stash, I've got a lot of beads that aren't standard beads, that are from beads that I found wherever, garage sales or what have you. I found this big, enormous, if you go back, I think it's episode 7 on my floss tubes, I found this enormous 8-pound bag of beads that didn't have any labeling or anything on them, but so I kind of had to make up a little naming convention for what they were, if they were opaque or if they were, whatever, what color. That's kind of, if I'm looking for beads that I'm trying to supply myself, this is kind of the organization I have to go through. So as part of that, I really like clear plastic things that I can see through. And I put things based on color, because if you're looking for beads, you're usually thinking about, number one, probably the form itself. Are these round beads? Are they seed beads? So that's probably typically most of what I have and what I'd be looking for. The second thing I would look for is color. So I've got them kind of this rainbow look here. I've got did the Roy G. Biv and red, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple. So that's kind of the range of things. And I like that I can see through all these. This is more the gold contingent and maybe the neutrals. I've got some gold and some silvers, and I get into the grays and browns and blacks over here. So most of those are seed beads, and they're in these containers here that look like little TikTok boxes. I don't have a name of them, but I found these a number of different places. They literally look like TikTok boxes, but you can buy them. And then they have this other case here. This case did not come with these guys. This came in, actually I found this in Goodwill too, and it had a bunch of floss in it. So it's got long dividers in here that skeins of floss were grouped in there. The only problem that these kind of beads, these Tic Tac case times ones, they're very hard to fill. Sometimes the tops are either too hard to get off or too easy to get off. So I'm always afraid you open up the little thing with varying success and you're afraid you're going to fling them across the room. See, I'm having trouble getting this one open. And once you open that a few times, it gets loose. But then you dump them out. It's a little less controlled kind of thing. The vials that they use for the Chatelaine stuff make it a little bit easier to use. But these all fit nicely in here. I got 2 rows of them. I find they work a little bit better if I angle them top to bottom. Oops, I don't have it quite that way. Top, bottom, back and forth. And these, in this little box, because I don't have as many of them, these are my bugle beads. So I can see all of those in one shot where I have all of those. And then I've got another clear box like this that has these kind of containers. Again, I don't know what it is. They have little screw tops to them. But they hold a bunch more. They're see-through, and that's really critical. When you're looking for beads, you need to know what they are. Using film canisters that are opaque, even if they're sort of see-through, you can't really get the true color for them and kind of get a size for them. So I've used this for these bigger ones. Another technique, this one is like just a floss organizer like you've seen, and this is where I found things that are other, that are typical things that might be on a chatelaine. So they have things like, these are a bunch of bicones that I have here. A bunch of bicones of various sizes. These are kind of octagon. These are kind of all the same colors, blue and green. These are kind of like flower petals of various sizes that might like go in the middle of a chatelaine. So I've picked out the kinds of things that I might, if I was going to use from stash, I might have some things to already go. These are a little more shaped like a flower. You can see those. So those are all in, and these are deeper things as well. Now, accessing these, if I were to, I'd probably stick them on a tacky bob, but to get them in and out of things, the bigger beads work well with these things that you can't take them out, and you can't really, you have to dig in, or an inch or so deep, a couple inches deep. So I only use these for like big beads like these. A couple of other things that I have found but have not used, but this has a name on it. This is a round storage container, SE. It's got 8 round storage containers. They're 1 by 5/8 by 5/8 inch, and it's got a plastic storage case with press-on lids. It's 9-in-1 is the number or name of it. It's 87086DB if you're interested in that. So you could put 9 of these. And the thing I like about these is they're shallow, so you could work right out of here. They've got a wide opening because you can get them in here. One other type, there's no labeling on this, but it's an interesting format. It comes in a little case here. It's got a little hinge clips, and they're in rows of 4. So you can pop open 1 or 2 or what have you and work out of here. They're a little tight to get your needle in there and pick up some beads, or you could dump them off onto your tacky bob or whatever, or use a little spoon or something. But keeps 4 of them in a row together, which is kind of nice. They don't roll around as much as the vials do. So again, I don't have a name on it, but you could probably do some creative searching to look for those. And labeling, I actually took the Mill Hill label off, and so I've got that information in here with a number on it. And then I put a number near the outside, hopefully you can read that, where I put 00479. It's a little description of it. They're white glass Mill Hill. They're 11/0. They're 2.5 millimeters, and there's 500 in a package. So I've got all the information, because like once you take it out of the box, the labeling rips and doesn't stay with it. This one I've managed to save the labeling, but it doesn't tell you that they're 11/0. You kind of have to just look at them. And for things that don't have labels on them that I got from unknown circumstances, I kind of made my own naming convention. I keep a spreadsheet of these so that I say, without even having to go look at the pile of stuff, do I have any brown beads, for instance? And so this one happens to be a rust brown. I put in whether it's opaque or transparent or what have you, frosted. This is a 15/0, and it is, I have overflow because I have more of these. This is how much fit in the little container. So that's the other thing about these, they don't hold a ton. And then I kind of created a code. So I put B for brown. It's actually a rust brown, but it falls into the brown family. -0, meaning they're seed beads, and -301, which means something I can no longer remember. So my numbering system's not great. The solution I think I'm finally going to go with is, somebody mentioned this, I don't know, on a Zoom or something, and I asked for this for Christmas, and I got it. And this is called Bead Storage Solution. It's a tiny container bead storage tray. It's 13 by 0.75 inches by 10.5 by 1.75 inches deep. And it's transparent. You can see through it. It comes in this nice tray that clips off here. You've got removable labels that you can put on your things. I'm hesitant to use those because I don't want to, put a label on there and then they're stuck on there. It says they're removable, but then you run out. So I'm more likely to just put a scrap of paper in there that says what they are. They've got little finger holes so you can pull them out easily. So they've got indentation on the top and the bottom, and they've got a little clip on the side, and they hinge up like this. And you can get a lot of them in here. This is a full grouping of Delica seed beads. This was a pack of 1,000, and I don't think I've used this. So this is 1,000 beads in here. And close it up. But they're easy to get to because of the top opening and the hinged top. They're easy to get in here. That's another problem. With those little Tic Tac box, you need a little funnel, and putting them in there is really a nightmare. This one you can dump it in and not get them all over the place. You can see through them, so they're nice and transparent on the bottom. And so, it's got a lot going on here. It's flat, it will sit on your thing, and you can almost work right out of this container as well. So, really like this. It holds, how many does it say it has on here? I think I figured all these beads that I just kind of showed you, I think I'm going to need a second container. But it's this big. It's as big as not even one of those little Steerlight containers. Oh, here it is, 82 pieces. So let's see, that includes one tray, one lid, 78 tiny containers, and 2 sheets of labels. So 78 of these. I think 2 of these, and it doesn't take up my whole wall. It's portable. It would doesn't quite fit in my little suitcase here, unfortunately. But I'm very happy with this. So I haven't used a lot. I've only got 3 in here so far, but I'm expecting that I will migrate some of this stuff into here. Right, so hopefully now you feel much more comfortable, just like I did, to be able to finish my beaded peacock tile once you know as much as this about beads, more than you probably were planning on finding out. And so you'll be maybe even taking something that calls for a metallic and put a bead in there instead. So those of you who don't like working with metallics, maybe beads are a more fun alternative that would allow you to open up the choices of charts that you might want to tackle. And it's going to add a little extra sparkle. Maybe it doesn't even call for metallics and you just want to go crazy and just bling it up. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've learned a whole lot about beads. I know I have by putting this together, and I feel much better about having beaded my first real beaded tile and feeling pretty confident that it went the way I hoped it would look after buying it years and years ago and hoping that I would someday have the courage to do it, and I did it, and I'm so happy I did. So thanks for joining me. I hope you leave me a comment if you have any ideas of your own or suggestions or comments about things that I talked about today, questions. Like, subscribe, all the fun things, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.